Kagurabachi chapter 100. Dude, I cannot even begin to tell you how, whenever I'm not the type of person, that when I read, I have reactions while I'm reading. Very few books kind of like do that to me. Very few of them, because most of the time I'm kind of like imagining it in my head. So like my reactions are in my head. It's really weird. But very few times I get reactions. But for this chapter, it had me giggling, had me jitting, and had me, super, super happy and super, super good. Right? So let's talk about it. So I got to say, this chapter was absolutely amazing. I do have some issues with not the pacing, but in terms of like the story planning that I want to talk about later. But let's break down this chapter. So first of all, yes, Shiba arrived on time, and he came in clutch. And here's the thing. I do think, and I'm going to discuss this later on in this video, but I do think that Hokazono, it feels to me like he is kind of, in this particular arc, it feels more present. Again, this is the first arc that I'm reading weekly, because the other arcs, I ended up reading them by chunks, right? Because I kind of started reading it a little bit late, then I had a lot of work, and then, the whole arc with Uraha and everything, it was kind of like, you know what I mean? But the last arc and this one, they are arcs that I'm reading weekly. And this arc in particular kind of feels like Hokazono is kind of putting stuff out there. And he does have quite the skill and quite the proficient ability to tie it all up together. I will give Hokazono that. They do have the ability, the capacity to tie everything up, so that even though for me at times it feels like they're kind of making things up as they go, they still have a good capacity to tie things up together very neatly, right? And the reason that I feel this is because right before his break, everything had a type of progression. But then when he came back from his break, I kind of felt like he threw in the whole idea of this other receptacle. He threw in like the idea of like the receptacle that keeps the barrier open, and then he gave us a little bit more lore when it comes to like spirit energy and everything. And then the next chapter, he kind of, for me, it felt like he threw in the second receptacle, which is like, okay. And then in the third chapter, he threw in, I forgot his name already, but he threw in the crazy guy with the, like, I'm gonna call him Gara. He threw in Gara with the metallic sand. And he came in clutch and he defeated the other one, but the other one is still alive. So it's like, okay. So then the fourth chapter, he kind of threw in this whole idea of, if we can get rid of the main guy, maybe things will get much better. Why? Because that's the way that Samura and Chihiro can't get in. And then in this chapter, it was like the guy was going to sacrifice himself, but, our boy came in clutch and was like, no, we can save him. So he came in, sent him to another space, and then Shiba, they were able to resume communication. They called Shiba, and Shiba teleported Yura outside of the building. And again, it wrapped up very nicely. I just hope that Hokazono doesn't get carried away with the fight between Samura and Chihiro versus Yura, because he opened up a lot of threads that I feel like they need to close. I feel like Hokazono needs to close those threads, because for me, they're still very much open. Like this whole idea of the second receptacle, they have to get rid of the guy, right? Like they have to get rid of him. And this whole idea of, the sword master, like what's going to happen with him now? The sword saint. So there's a lot of open threads that I hope Hokazono is able to close, because I feel like these threads were just kind of opened up because Hokazono needed a way to further the story. Again, I agree that it's very normal for writers to make up the story as they go. Typically, for example, book writers, they do that all the time. The only difference is that book writers can have a lot of time in between like books, they have a good amount of time between books to do that. Typically, for example, they have 2 or 3 years in between books, and in between those 2 or 3 years, they can take their time to like plan it out and like write it out and everything. Sadly, with manga though, that's not very possible. That's why, for example, I only read up to Fishman Island. For those of you that were in my old channel, I read up to Fishman Island with One Piece on my first time reading it. And I praised Oda for specifically that reason, you know. I wouldn't say that Oda plans his story from like the very beginning, because it's a long story. And I feel like planning the story from the very beginning would be very hard for him to do. But I did praise Oda for being able to have the mental capacity and just keeping tabs on all his open threads, all his open storylines, so he can use them later on. For example, I definitely don't think, and spoilers for One Piece, I guess, in Kagurabachi, but I genuinely don't think that Laboon was meant to be part of Brook's crew. I think they were completely separate characters, but Oda remembered Laboon and was like, oh, okay, this is the way that I can connect it. And in the end, Oda ended up connecting it. You know what I mean? That's what I mean when I say a writer, an author has a very good grasp and a very, very good, just tight story thread that they can keep using, because I don't expect an author to plan out their story from day one, because it's hard. It's really fucking difficult. I run D&D campaigns, and I don't plan it from day one. I make shit up in between sessions, because it's difficult to plan a story from 1 to 100 on day 0. So yeah, so Hokazono has this ability as well. Hokazono is able to take those story threads and use them perfectly going onward. This whole thing with, you know, like the abilities that Chihiro's able to do and everything, he's perfectly, you know, Hokazono has this ability. So I hope that happens, because I feel like a lot of these story threads were kind of open to get to this point, but I really I want those story threads to be solved. I wouldn't want, you know, Kagurabachi to suffer the same thing that, you know, Jujutsu Kaisen suffered, which is a lot of open story threads that don't really go anywhere. And with Jujutsu Kaisen, a lot of story threads were open to get to a certain outcome of the story, but they were never fully fleshed out. So I hope that's not the case with this arc, and I hope that it reaches a satisfying conclusion. And I hope we don't get distracted by the possibly very amazing, 2v1 Enchanted Blades fight. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that. And I gotta say, I really enjoy the writing in this chapter, and I really enjoy that, you know, Hokazono was able to keep the characters very consistently. You know, like Hikaru or Hikaru, I forget his name. I'm sorry, I forget these characters. I don't know why with this particular series, I always forget characters' names. They're just kind of similar, like Iruhiko, Hikuto, and it's like, right? So yeah, you know, and they're able to stay consistent. And I think, again, if manga were books, in the sense of if manga artists were to be able to release like one volume every 2 or 3 months, for example, or every 6 months, I think it would help the authors, you know, like be able to flesh out their stories even more. Because in 2 chapters, we got some crazy character development for the guy that's in charge of like keeping the barrier. With the first time we met him, he was like, yeah, I did this for the money, dude. And then the second chapter that we meet him, and he's like, give the money to my parents. I'm going to sacrifice myself for this squad. So it's like, okay, all right. That's pretty cool, I guess. So yeah, I really do enjoy the character development. I like the way that Hokazono paces everything. I really would have wished we would have seen more from Uraha. And I forgot the lightning guy's name. I'm gotta study these names. I'm sorry. And I really would have wished we would have seen more of them. But I mean, everything is good. We got some pretty good fights. Obviously, Yura is overpowered, and I feel like Hokazono is that type of author, very weirdly, in Shonen Jump, that doesn't focus so long on fights. And I think that's the new status of the Shonen Jump, is a lot of authors don't focus so much on fighting. They focus more on story a little bit. Before, we would have had this fight between, you know, like Yura and I forgot his name. I'm so sorry. Between Yura and this other guy, I forgot his name though. Between Yura and Azami, I'm sorry. The fight between Yura and Azami would have probably lasted like 5 chapters if we would have been in the old days of Shonen Jump. And the battle between Samura, Chihiro, and Yura would definitely last like 20 plus chapters in the old era of Shonen Jump. So yeah, you know what I mean? I hope things work out in the end and the pacing issues are not a problem. Overall, I enjoyed this chapter. You know, Shiba coming in clutch at the very end. It was really good. I love how fast paced this manga is, but at the same time, how slow it can be. Because I felt these last chapters as a slow burn, but when you look at them in hindsight and read them back to back, they were pretty fast. Shit happened really fast, and I just enjoyed how they were able to close the space, open communication, bring in Samura, bring in Shiba, and then have Shiba just take this guy outside. It was a really good plan. It was a magnificent plan, and I love again that Hokazono keeps true to his rules and was like, okay, so this is what we're gonna do. So yeah, really good, really amazing. I enjoyed this chapter fully. I would give this a 9 out of 10 very easily. I thought it was very well done. Every character was in character, and it was really amazing. And yeah, that's basically all I gotta say, right? So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. And I'm sorry about the names. Okay, I gotta review the names. I gotta make a list. Thank you, and bye-bye.